My name is Brandon Benefill. Today I'll be refuting Amanda's speech about physician-assisted suicide. The main claim was that physician-assisted suicide poses serious problems in the patient-doctor relationship. Her main secondary claims are physician-assisted suicide for terminally ill patients would allow for it to be used for non-terminally ill people who would like to have the service. Second, physician-assisted suicide goes against the goals of medicine and physicians. Number three, physician-assisted suicide would discredit other options for treatment. In response to claim one, that physician-assisted suicide for terminally ill patients would lead to it being allowed for non-terminally ill patients, this is a slippery slope fallacy that has no real backing. The Oregon Death with Dignity Act passed in 1997 and still holds to the same strict rules for doctors to determine whether or not a lethal dosage may be applied to a patient. You have no need to worry that, under these rules, there's no need to worry that someone that cannot give consent on their own would be allowed to receive the lethal dosage, such as from a family member or other. Another safeguard in Oregon's laws is that patients must have multiple sessions with counseling and the doctors to receive this prescription. They must ask multiple times, writing and oral, to have it even get to the doctor's desk. In response to secondary claim two, that physician-assisted suicide goes against the goals of medicine and physicians, this really comes down to a moral position and a claim of value rather than a claim of fact. It becomes the argument of whether it is more moral to let the patient suffer for the last couple months of their life or to allow them to end their life on their terms. In Span's article in the New York Times, Dr. Kess gives his opinions on it from Montana, where it is not illegal to administer lethal doses. Dr. Kess used to be on the table about it, but after having patients who wanted it, he went over to pro-physician-assisted suicide. It is also not difficult to control with all the strict requirements on allowing patients to go through with it. There's lots of risk for the doctor, and therefore they control it well. In response to secondary claim three, that physician-assisted suicide would discredit other options for treatment. Palliative care does not alleviate suffering in 100% of the cases. But in most cases of physician-assisted suicide in states where it is legal, this care is almost always administered before physician-assisted suicide is an option. It really becomes a last resort for it. From Quill's book in the Hastings Center Bioethics Briefing book, data collected from the Oregon Health Department shows that the practice is stable and relatively rare, accounting for approximately 1 in 1,000 deaths in Oregon. That's about it.
All right, the main and secondary issues are labeled pretty well. The signpost as you get to the first point is good. You're making an argument about that this is a slippery slope, and your primary claim here is that the Oregon experience demonstrates that this is not likely to happen. I think that the very last piece of information that you have from Quill ought to be used here, showing that in fact that it's relatively rare and it's not really increasing and producing the harms that the advocate seems to be suggesting. I don't know what the advocate's evidence on this particular point was, and you don't really discuss that. I think having a piece of evidence on that point would be pretty convincing. The argument about the safeguards, I think, is a good potential response. You do want to make sure that you give us a source citation for those safeguards, because I didn't really hear any. I assume that they are generally there and that you're not making those things up, but I think you want to be convincing to us. And obviously you've got the information from someplace, so you need to be citing it. The transition to the second point was pretty clear. Your argument here is that it's a value claim, and I think there needs to be a little bit clearer explanation, because it seems like you're assuming that they're making a choice between suffering and life, and I think that the advocate's argument was that the suffering can be minimized through the palliative care issue. Your argument on the third point seems to be that palliative care can't always address those issues, but I didn't hear any evidence on that point from you, and I don't remember what the advocate's evidence on that particular point was, and because you're not confronting the evidence directly there, I think that puts us in a little bit of an awkward situation. Your example of the one person, Kess, the doctor from Montana who switched sides, is an interesting thing, but it's not a direct quote. It's kind of a vague example that you're referring to, and I'm not sure that it demonstrates that either palliative care is inadequate or that it's entirely a value argument. I thought you actually did a pretty good job presenting the issues up until the last point where you sound like you're bailing out on the argument. I'm just done, and I think you need to be a little bit more coherent than that when you're finishing up to leave us with a good impression. All right, thank you. William.